I'm not proud of what happened. And if you'd asked me a few years ago whether I'd ever peel an entire road apart with heavy equipment just to make a point, I'd have laughed and told you that was something only stubborn old men in coffee shops talked about. Then life introduced me to the folks at Cedar Ridge Estates, and somewhere between their marble entrance fountain and their fourth complaint about my pickup truck, I realized there are people who mistake patience for weakness every single time. The funny thing is, none of this started over money. It started over 4 speed bumps. 4 ordinary concrete speed bumps that I paid for myself because I was tired of hearing tires squeal around the blind curve outside my house and wondering if the next sound would be a child getting hit. My name's Ethan Brooks. I'm 39 years old, and I run a small paving company outside of Western Tennessee. I grew up covered in dust, asphalt, diesel fuel, and sweat, and I've never really wanted anything different. My grandfather used to tell me that roads are like promises. They're only worth something if people can trust them, and maybe that's why I always took care of ours, even after I didn't have to anymore. Years ago, when developers came knocking with their fancy presentations and impossible offers, I sold most of the family farmland because farming wasn't paying the bills anymore. But I held on to one thing they didn't think mattered: the access road. It stretched about half a mile from the state highway up to what eventually became Cedar Ridge Estates. 43 oversized homes with stone facades, decorative lanterns, golf carts, luxury SUVs, and people who seemed convinced expensive houses automatically made them experts on everything. The paperwork was crystal clear. They had permanent easement access, which meant they could legally travel across my road whenever they pleased, but ownership stayed with me. Maintenance stayed with me too. And for nearly 16 years I honored that responsibility without asking for applause. Every spring I'd seal cracks before weeds found them. Every winter I'd patch potholes before suspensions got damaged. Every summer I'd repaint faded edges because I believed if people depended on my road every day, then they deserved one that was safe. Nobody thanked me much, but honestly I didn't expect them to. Most of the homeowners were decent enough, busy people raising kids or commuting into Nashville. But somewhere along the way, the Homeowners Association transformed from organizing neighborhood cookouts into acting like a tiny government that believed every square inch they could see belonged under their control. The president was a woman named Vanessa Cole, polished smile, designer sunglasses, always speaking with that slow, practiced confidence people use when they're used to getting their way before conversations even begin. Every interaction with her felt like sitting through a customer service seminar where you somehow ended up being blamed for someone else's mistake. "Mr. Brooks," she'd say with that fake little smile, "we've received concerns from several residents." I eventually realized several residents usually meant Vanessa herself. My work trailers were too visible. My equipment yard wasn't attractive enough. My pickup leaked diesel smell near the entrance. My gravel shoulder looked rustic instead of elegant. I listened because arguing only fed people like her. Then I'd go back to work because asphalt doesn't care about neighborhood politics. The real problem arrived after the county expanded the elementary school bus route. Every weekday afternoon, children started crossing near the sharp curve about 200 yards from my front porch. It wasn't a terrible road, but that bend came up fast, especially if someone treated it like the front straightaway at Daytona. I watched delivery vans drift wide. I watched teenagers in sports cars accelerate because they figured private roads meant fewer consequences. One afternoon, I saw a little girl chasing her backpack after it slipped off the sidewalk, and a black SUV came around that corner far quicker than it should have. Nothing happened. Thank God nothing happened. But I remember my stomach dropping hard enough that I had to sit on the porch for 10 minutes afterward. That evening, I called one of my concrete suppliers. 2 weeks later, we poured 4 speed bumps, painted them bright yellow, added reflective markers, and installed warning signs well before the curve. They weren't there to annoy anybody. They were there because I'd rather listen to people complain about slowing down than attend a child's funeral. For almost a month, everything worked exactly as intended. Cars slowed. School buses rolled through safely. Kids crossed laughing instead of sprinting. I figured the issue was solved, until one Tuesday morning when I climbed into my truck before sunrise and immediately noticed something looked wrong. The warning sign was lying in the ditch. Fresh scrape marks crossed the pavement. Where the first speed bump should have been, there was nothing but broken chunks of concrete scattered like shattered bones across the shoulder. I drove farther up and found the other 3 destroyed too. Someone hadn't just removed them, they'd attacked them with equipment. Sitting inside my mailbox was a thick, cream-colored envelope with the Cedar Ridge HOA seal stamped across the front. Inside was a neatly typed notice informing me that unauthorized traffic calming devices had violated community aesthetic standards, that the association had arranged their removal, and that I owed them $900 for demolition expenses. At the bottom was Vanessa's signature, perfectly centered, perfectly confident. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because I'd never seen someone so completely misunderstand whose land they were standing on. I looked back toward that empty stretch of pavement, then back at the letter in my hands, and for the first time since Cedar Ridge had been built, I stopped wondering how to keep the peace and started wondering how expensive arrogance could become. The next morning, I drove straight to the county records office with that ridiculous HOA notice folded in my shirt pocket, mostly because I wanted someone else to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. The clerk behind the counter had known my family for years, and when I slid the deed across to her, she adjusted her glasses, looked at the survey, then looked back at me with the kind of expression people wear when they're trying not to laugh in a government building. "Ethan," she said, tapping the map with her pen, "they have an easement, that's all. They can drive across it. They don't own it, they can't improve it, and they sure can't tear something out without the owner's permission." That was all I needed to hear. Still, I wasn't about to gamble on assumptions, so I drove another 20 minutes to my attorney's office. Frank Reynolds had represented my grandfather decades earlier, then my father, and now me. He listened without interrupting while I laid the HOA letter on his desk beside photographs of the destroyed speed bumps. When he finished reading, he leaned back in his chair, took off his glasses, and chuckled. "Son," he said, "I've defended contractors, farmers, and landowners for almost 35 years, but I've never seen an HOA bill a property owner for removing safety improvements from his own road." I asked him the only question that mattered. "Can I remove the asphalt?" Frank didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened the easement language, read it again, then smiled the way a chess player smiles after spotting checkmate 5 moves ahead. "You can't block their access. That's protected. But nowhere does it say you're required to provide a premium asphalt surface forever. As long as they still have reasonable access, maintenance standards are your decision." I stared at him for a second before asking, "So you're telling me?" He finished the sentence for me. "I'm telling you that dirt roads existed long before asphalt did." I drove home with my window down, thinking about my grandfather's old farm. That road had been packed red clay for almost 50 years before I ever paved it. Asphalt wasn't a legal requirement. It had simply been a courtesy. And courtesy has a funny way of disappearing when people mistake it for obligation. Wednesday morning, before most of Cedar Ridge had finished their first cup of coffee, a compact milling machine and a rented skid steer rolled onto my property. My 2 crew guys, Mason and Luis, looked at me like I had finally lost my mind. Mason scratched his beard and asked, "Boss, are we really doing this?" I nodded once. "We're restoring the original road." Luis laughed so hard he nearly dropped his gloves. "That's the nicest way I've ever heard someone declare war." We started just after sunrise. The milling drum bit into the pavement with that deep mechanical growl I've heard 1,000 times on job sites. Only this time, every strip of black asphalt curling away felt strangely personal. Thick ribbons rolled aside, exposing the old Georgia red clay underneath, packed tight from decades before the subdivision ever existed. By 9 o'clock, people had started gathering. Curtains moved. Garage doors opened. Golf carts lined the shoulder like spectators watching a parade they couldn't quite understand. Around lunchtime, Vanessa arrived in a white luxury SUV, heels clicking across loose gravel as she stormed toward me waving the HOA letter I'd received only 2 days earlier. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she demanded. I shut down the machine so we could actually hear each other. "Removing my asphalt. You can't do this." "Already am. This road serves 43 homeowners. It also belongs to one." Her face tightened. "You're punishing innocent families." I shrugged. "No, Vanessa. I'm discontinuing a service that I voluntarily provided. Those are 2 different things." She pointed toward the stripped roadway. "We'll sue you." I smiled politely. "Frank said you'd probably say that." She spun around without another word, probably because she knew threatening lawsuits sounds a lot stronger when the other person hasn't already spoken with an attorney. By sunset, almost the entire paved surface had been removed, leaving behind a smooth clay roadway that looked surprisingly solid under clear skies. Honestly, for the first day it drove just fine. A few residents even rolled by slowly, giving me dirty looks, but making it home without much trouble. I almost wondered if maybe everyone would adapt and the lesson would quietly end there. Then Thursday night, the weather forecast changed. Around midnight, the first thunder rolled across the valley. I woke before dawn to rain hammering the roof hard enough that I couldn't hear the television. By 7 o'clock, the old clay had transformed into exactly what every country kid knows wet red dirt becomes. Thick, sticky mud that clings to boots, tires, and dignity with equal determination. I poured myself coffee and carried the mug out to the porch. The first vehicle I saw was a silver crossover trying to climb the slight incline near the entrance. The driver pressed harder on the accelerator. The tires spun faster. Mud sprayed 30 feet behind the vehicle, while the SUV barely moved 6 inches forward. 5 minutes later, a delivery van tried the same thing and slid sideways into the drainage shoulder. Around 8, a brand-new electric sedan eased into the curve, hit one of the softer sections, and settled so deep the undercarriage rested on the mud. The driver climbed out wearing loafers that immediately disappeared ankle-deep into clay. He stared at his shoes with absolute disbelief while I quietly sipped my coffee. Mason walked onto the porch carrying a biscuit sandwich. "Think we should help?" he asked. "If they asked politely," I replied. Nobody did. Instead, angry phone calls started flying. Tow trucks came and went. Parents complained online that school buses couldn't safely reach the neighborhood. Delivery companies temporarily suspended service until conditions improved. Local real estate agents quietly postponed weekend showings because prospective buyers weren't exactly excited about touring million-dollar homes by hiking through muddy ruts. By Saturday, the neighborhood social media page looked like a battlefield. Some residents blamed me. Others blamed Vanessa. A surprising number asked the obvious question that should have been asked before anyone touched those speed bumps in the first place. Who authorized removing safety equipment from a privately owned road? That question spread faster than any rumor. Monday evening, someone knocked on my front door. It wasn't Vanessa. It was an older resident named Harold, a retired Air Force mechanic I'd always gotten along with. He stood there holding a homemade peach pie his wife had baked. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. We sat on the porch while the rain finally stopped. Harold sighed. Most of us didn't know she ordered those speed bumps removed. She told everyone the county cited them. I wasn't surprised. She lied. He nodded slowly. "Looks that way." After a long silence, he asked, "What'll it take to fix this?" I looked out toward the muddy road where another pickup fishtailed through the curve at barely 15 miles an hour. Honestly, less than it would have cost before they touched my property. Harold laughed despite himself. "You're enjoying this a little." I took another sip of coffee before answering. "No, I'm enjoying finally being respected." 2 days later, Cedar Ridge called an emergency HOA meeting. Residents packed the clubhouse, tempers boiling over as property values, daily commutes, and neighborhood pride all sank deeper into the mud with every passing day. Vanessa tried blaming me again, insisting I was holding the community hostage, but then Harold stood up in front of everyone. "Did you or did you not authorize destroying Mr. Brooks' speed bumps?" The room went silent. Vanessa hesitated just long enough for everyone to hear the answer she wasn't saying. That hesitation cost her more than any confession could have. By the following Friday afternoon, my office phone rang. It was Vanessa, though her voice sounded very different this time. Quieter, slower, stripped of every ounce of authority she'd hidden behind for years. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "the board would like to discuss a resolution." I looked through my office window toward the stacks of asphalt millings still sitting in my yard and answered, "That's good, because I already wrote one." I spent most of that weekend putting together a proposal that looked more like a commercial paving contract than a peace offering. And when Monday morning rolled around, I drove into the Cedar Ridge clubhouse, wearing the same dusty work boots I'd been wearing all week, while everyone else sat around a polished conference table dressed like they were attending a corporate merger. The atmosphere couldn't have been more different from our last meeting. Nobody was smiling now. Nobody was talking about neighborhood image or aesthetic standards. They were talking about insurance claims, delayed home sales, missed deliveries, school transportation, and residents threatening to sue their own HOA board. Vanessa slid a folder toward me and forced a tired smile. Let's see what it'll take to move forward. I open my clipboard instead. Materials, labor scheduling, equipment mobilization, compaction testing, drainage correction where the old shoulders have softened, and a 10-year maintenance agreement. One board member frowned. 10 years. I nodded. You enjoyed 16 years of free maintenance. This time we're doing it professionally. Another member leaned forward. Can't you just pave it? I looked him straight in the eye. Could you just replace something someone destroyed on your property because they thought they had the right? Nobody answered. They couldn't. I kept going. You'll purchase every ton of asphalt. My company supervises every stage. Any future modifications, including removing signs, speed bumps, or safety devices, require written approval from the property owner, me. If somebody ignores that agreement, the maintenance contract becomes void immediately. Vanessa stared at the paperwork for what felt like a full minute before quietly asking, "And if we don't sign?" I shrugged. "Then you keep driving on the original road." The silence that followed was almost uncomfortable. Finally, Harold cleared his throat from the back of the room. "We've already spent more arguing than fixing this would have cost." Heads slowly nodded around the table. One by one they signed. By Wednesday afternoon, the wire transfer cleared, and for the first time since this whole mess began, I actually felt a little sorry for them. Not because they'd lost, but because pride had cost them far more than asphalt ever would have. Saturday morning, 6 dump trucks rolled in carrying fresh hot mix while steam drifted into the cool morning air. My crew unloaded pavers, rollers, and rakes, but this time the HOA board insisted on honoring the agreement exactly as written. They supplied the labor. I supplied the supervision. Watching 6 executives and board members struggle to spread hot asphalt in 90-degree heat was one of the strangest sights I've ever witnessed. Expensive sunglasses disappeared after the first hour. Designer gloves were traded for blistered hands. Sweat soaked through golf shirts that had probably never seen a real job site before. Every now and then one of them would look over, hoping I'd jump in and help. Instead, I'd point with my clipboard. "That lift's too thin." They'd scrape it up and do it again. "Roller speed's too fast." They'd slow down and start over. "Joint isn't tight enough." More work. Mason leaned over beside me and whispered, "You're really making them earn it." I smiled without taking my eyes off the fresh mat. "I'm making them understand it." Late that afternoon, the last roller pass was finished. The surface looked perfect, smooth enough to reflect the evening sunlight exactly the way good pavement should. I walked the entire length with a measuring wheel, checking edges, transitions, drainage, and compaction. Then I stopped near the dangerous curve where everything had started. Vanessa watched me approach with cautious optimism. "Everything pass?" she asked. "Almost." She looked confused. I pointed toward the truck behind me where 6 brand new speed bumps were strapped to a trailer. "We're installing these." Her eyes widened. 6. "The traffic study says this section deserves more protection than before." She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, then slowly closed it again as she remembered the contract she'd signed only days earlier. By sunset, all 6 were installed, painted bright yellow with reflective markings that practically glowed when headlights hit them. Kids crossed that curve safely every afternoon after that. Drivers slowed down without anyone having to remind them. And something else changed too. Residents who had barely spoken to me before suddenly waved when they drove past. Harold stopped by every couple of weeks with vegetables from his garden. A young family even brought homemade cookies one Christmas and thanked me for refusing to back down because, as they admitted with embarrassed smiles, those speed bumps probably kept their own children safer than they'd realized. As for Vanessa, she resigned from the HOA board before the year was over. I never celebrated that. Honestly, I don't think she was an evil person. I think she'd simply spent too long believing authority and ownership were the same thing. And life has a funny way of correcting that misunderstanding when the paperwork says otherwise. Looking back now, people still ask me if tearing up that road was worth all the trouble. My answer surprises them every time. It was never about revenge. Asphalt can always be replaced. Money comes and goes. What mattered was drawing a line where respect had quietly disappeared. Being patient doesn't mean surrendering your rights, and being a good neighbor doesn't mean letting people rewrite the rules simply because they're louder than you are. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is calmly remind everyone where the boundary actually is, then let their own choices teach the lesson you never could. So now I'm curious what you think. Did I go too far by taking the road back to its original condition? Or did the HOA force that outcome the moment they decided they could destroy someone else's property without permission? If you were in my boots, would you have handled it differently, or would you have done exactly the same? Let me know down in the comments, because stories like this always spark great conversations. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who's dealt with an HOA, difficult neighbors, or anyone who forgot that respect works both ways.